Good evening. This is Critical Talk with Professor Amanal Dean, and I have the wonderful occasion of having two wonderful women with me this evening, and we're going to discuss a range of things, mostly centering on the critical conversations that are going on now. I have Dr. Harriet Lewis and Reverend Linda Holiday Lawrence. I don't see Lawrence on there, but that's okay. Um, and I want to first tell you a little bit about them. Minister Linda Holiday Lawrence has over 30 years of professional business experience, coupled with a lifetime of human rights and social justice advocacy. Simultaneously, she has over 25 years of entertainment experience, complementing her professional and advocacy background, being a card carrying member of Rainbow Push Coalition as well. They always say women are busy. Um, she is an active member of Trinity United Church of Christ here in Chicago, and she uses her professional experience combined with advocacy and entertainment to fill a lifetime commitment to social justice. And forgive me for not reading all that you are. I will get to all that you are. And let me move along so we can get at these biting questions that I have. Dr. Harriet Lewis is an inclusion and equity consultant and serves as a senior advisor at the Inner City Muslim Action Network, a Chicago based community organization that fosters health, wellness, and healing in the inner city by organizing for social change, cultivating the arts, and opening an holistic health center. And if I'm not mistaken, it has the only FHC, FQ, what is
The
it?
FQHC in the surrounding area.
Me and the acronyms. I'm just not
Heavily qualified health center.
right. Um, I want to say that also Dr. Lewis is a board advisor to the Nigerian NGO New Era Educational and Charitable Support Foundation, and she also serves as the honorary consul for the Republic of Cabo Verde to the state of Illinois. So, needless to say, I'm outclassed and outranked, but we will
Never.
go
Never.
we'll go ahead. There's lots of stuff out there. And so I want to first begin with some of the questions. And it's really an honor, Reverend Linda, to have you with us because the Muslim community writ large, for some reason, never engages without duress the Protestant community. Protestants only engage the Muslim community under duress. Although we, let me say, have different paths to God, I don't know if that's a good way to say that, but let me work on that because what I want to say, it will come out all screwed up. Let me say, we're in different positionalities, all trying to get to God. We don't seem to accept when there's duress, come together to do our advocacy work intentionally. Does that make sense to you? I mean, interfaith dialogue typically involves churches that got three members, like the Lutheran Church, or churches that got four, like the Methodist Church, when the angst of the advocacy sits in the Black church, along with the African American Muslim community. So I'm trying to get at why is that? I talk to you, but I want everybody to talk to you.
Yeah. Um, First off, it's a very complicated response that I can give because my personal experience pushed the envelope outside of that parameter in a very powerful and successful and meaningful way. However, on a broad scale, I agree that tends to be very common, very distressing, especially for those of us who do hold a very credible understanding of our theological history. Um, those of us who have been exposed to the raw understanding of our theological history, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, we share the same history. We come from an Abrahamic lineage, and therefore the conflict that we struggle with in our human ordinary context is because many times those of us across our in diverse faith community, especially in the Christian denominations, tend not to always refer back to our historical beginnings in order to appreciate what's available. If we were to cross the line and begin more dialogue in more community opportunities, then we could possibly find new ways to render healing, restoration, and reparation for our own ills. Um, there are several problems with it, but most of all, there's a fear. There's a fear because unfortunately the Christian community has not received appreciative history and understanding of the broadness that exists within the Muslim family and its community. Very few understand the context
So what you're
that
telling me, hold on. So what
mm,
you're telling me is that the fear comes from just a little lack of knowledge.
yes,
And I would push back, because this is critical talk. I would push back and say that many in the African American Christian community have Muslims in their family.
most of whom unfortunately are representative of one major faculty, especially across the Chicago community, New York. It's broadly those who are in the Nation of Islam versus those who are traditional Muslim representing Sunni and some of the other denominations who are part of the real context of the Muslim faith.
Okay, but let
So
me.
when the Christians who you're referring to think about it, they're fear.
Well, wait a minute, but hold on. First, let me ask you to fix your camera so that we can make sure that we're seeing you clearly. And while you're doing that,
Can I respond, Dr. Aldine, a little bit there?
oh yes, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in 2015, and I was trying to bring it up before, but I know most of it from memory. In 2015, I did a small sample study. I conducted a small study. It was about 106 people in the sample. 60% Christian, African American Christians, 40% African American Muslims, primarily from the Chicago community. And the majority of the Muslims were not from the Nation of Islam. The majority of Muslims, some were from like 30% from the Nation of Islam, others were Sunni, and other traditions within Islam. And we lost Minister Linda,
She's
but
there.
she's there somewhere. I'm not sure where she's at, but I'm sure she'll come back very quickly. But you know, that study that I did, the focus was on African American Muslims and African American Christians and social justice. And what I found fascinating, the questions range from, you know, how did you come to Islam? How did you come to Christianity? How did you come to other faith traditions if you were not either one of those or no faith tradition at all? Your family, social justice activities. What do you watch? What are you interested in? And how do you, you know, connect with, for Christians, how do you connect with Muslims as far as furthering interfaith or interfaith dialogue as well as action? And how do Muslims work with Christians? And the one thing that was fascinating is that when it came to any type of interfaith dialogue and action, there were several things that they could, that the respondent could could select dialogue, inviting Muslim or Christian to dinner, participating in some type of social justice activity.
Mhm.
Um, the majority of Christians um, were more interested in inviting an African American Muslim. The African American Christians were more interested in inviting an African American Muslim to a religious event, whereas more of the African American Muslims were more interested in inviting the Christians to a social justice event.
Yeah.
And I think part of that, even though both African Americans as a whole, we have a rich tradition, a rich history of social activism because of our experience in this country. But I think, and African American Christians have, and then out of that, African American Muslims. But I think within the Christian tradition, and I could be wrong, but within the Christian tradition, there is for many people, there is this edict of proselytization more so within the African American community than so within the African American Christian community than in the African American Muslim community.
Well, that you bring up a bunch of good points, and I think that it is interesting for me, who's never belonged to the Nation of Islam, to see how it figures in the imagination of others outside of the community. There is no quote unquote traditional Islam. There are many cultural Islams, but there's no orthodoxy. And some of the other things, as one tries to fit the terminology that they know onto other communities. And that's why I think many of us uh, move toward sharing cultural competencies as we talk to each other. My impression is that it's not so much, well, maybe perhaps it is, but maybe it isn't. The Nation of Islam, I think, provides a philosophical seating to many
Mhm.
because of the spiritual and physical and intellectual enragement against the condition of Black people in this particular society, but in societies around the globe.
Mhm.
I think that perhaps back to Harriet's uh, narrative, I don't want to debate God uh,
Mhm.
because that doesn't take you anywhere. God is fine. But God, no matter how you look at God, expects us to do some things and to impart some wisdom. Now, where we might run into problems is where that wisdom leads us. If you want us to turn the other cheek as opposed to stand for justice and the taking the consequences of that stand, maybe a difference of opinion. But it doesn't mean that we can't meet halfway and I can be looking like I'm going to turn my cheek as I knock you out. I mean, it can have all kinds of middle paths. But there's also in the air, one of the things that infuriates me is the interreligious dialogue that doesn't seek out the African American Christian voice.
I
That
agree.
is such an important voice.
Mhm.
And to talk to, and this is not fair, and may God forgive me, minuscule, what they used to call in the literature, high church professional dialoguers in the white churches, to talk to obscures the social advocacy all of us have. To give you an example, and was one of my questions to you, was we had we didn't have, there was a webinar, and in this webinar, one immigrant Muslim woman takes it upon herself to want to address African American Muslims. Tell me about your inward experience. And I'm saying, have you if I had been there, I probably would have screamed, jumped off the camera, cussed everybody out, but the whole 9 yards, where she's not only talking to me because she sees me as Linda. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm,
She doesn't see me as her spiritual sister equivalent,
mhm.
but she's, excuse me, she sees me as Linda. When we're out there in the world and you're gonna put your foot on my neck, you don't say, "Oh, Linda, what church you belong to?" And Amina, where you think you going? You see us as black women.
Mhm.
Don't leave me out here by myself, ladies. No honey and don't amen me.
No, no, I'm sitting there thinking about what you said, and I'm just thinking about just how she probably, this is the thing that we deal with, as Black women, as Black people, as Black women specifically, just the constant microaggressions that we deal with, and we have to suck it up. I mean, she verbally assaulted the women who were there.
Exactly.
I
But
mean,
and the men.
yes, I mean, just
Mhm.
the fact that she said it, that came out of her mouth, there was a visceral emotional response, I'm sure, that was painful that they had to experience,
Yeah.
on the webinar. And if no one cussed her out, not cursed her out, no,
Well,
if
you
no
know
one
what they did? They
had
did.
to
And
absorb
they
that
did it.
microaggression.
No, they did it in the chat, and she ignored it.
Hmm. Yeah, she
Now,
assaulted them. And
to-
and what's sad is that she didn't realize that a woman of faith did not realize that she had assaulted two other women from her own faith tradition, and this is what exists, and I know that Trinity has addressed this as well in an intentional way, that whether it's African American Christians or African American Muslims, we still experience racism within our traditions, and there's no reason why we
Absolutely.
should not be intentionally working together to address racism and additional social injustices and oppressive systems collectively. Because, like Dr. Aldine said, and I know that you believe the same way, Minister Linda, is that we experience these oppressive systems not because we're Christian, not because we're Muslim, but because we're Black.
yeah.
And we need to be
Exactly.
more intentional in addressing them.
Go ahead, Linda.
Um, my response to that is to look at the current conversation that I had with Caucasian sister that I work with. And I intentionally call her my sister because we have developed a very strong friendship over the 20 years that we've worked together.
Mhm.
Um, but she did not comprehend the depth of importance that it was to remove Aunt Jemima
Hmm.
from the pancake box.
Yeah.
She had successfully bought into the marketing strategy that was behind the entire context, which was this happy, jolly, warm looking woman who prepares your breakfast.
Oh my God.
And my
Mhm.
really aggressively but very strategically breaking down her conscious thought until she understood the sensitivity and
Mhm.
using her own background as a Polish woman, being born in a country where her own elders had suffered grave oppression.
Mhm.
I was able to finally break through that wall of marketing and
Mhm.
help her
Mhm.
understand the visceral disgust that I felt as she kept saying,
Mhm.
but I don't understand, I don't see it that way.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And for the pain that we go through every time we're viscerally disrespected, as you described, Dr. Emina, in this discussion, it is so much more incumbent upon us to take that pain and channel it into a moment of education
Mhm.
and to drill that education in even at the cost of a person trying to ignore until we find the words and the symbolic analogies that cause them to reckon with their own ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reckoning with their own ignorance is when the door opens for them to understand the importance of that change. And it took literally over an hour for me to keep cracking down all of her defenses and all of her imaginings as she had bought into so many years of thinking that what could be wrong with Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben?
Do they still make Uncle Ben? They still make Uncle
They
Ben?
do.
Oh yes, Uncle Ben is on every store shelf, just like Aunt Jemima.
Ah, well, I think that uh, that is the undercrux of what the young people who are out in the streets are talking about. It's a knee on neck metaphorically, also.
Mm-hmm.
It's a knee that props up many, many walls. One of the stories I heard this morning, and this has really got my goat, and I'm going to deal with it next week after I harass some people. I might bring you two ladies back on. Is that many, there have been high mortality rates in the African American community, especially, but also in the Latino community. And one of the things that is happening is that Black and Latino men and women are showing up at the hospital with symptoms. The symptoms are being written down. No, look at their file. Okay,
Hmm.
the uh, AFib has become COVID. Water on the lungs from COPD has become COVID. And
Hmm.
then what they're able to quickly do is to chart you out to hospice care.
Hmm.
And you die because you were never treated for what you have. So that
Wow.
the bed can be freed up either for someone with insurance, or just someone else. Black folk are still being misdiagnosed and discouraged from coming to the hospital, meaning that they're still dying. So our mortality rate, some of it is probably the natural mortality rate under uh, a pandemic, but the others of it is intentional. And Black and Latino physicians are beginning to look at the pandemic as an excuse for genocide.
Hmm.
The brutality rates across the nation have not slowed down, they've increased. The man who had his knee on George Floyd's neck was treated well after arrested. Only white police officers were allowed to guard and tend to him. And
Yes,
then you
I
had
didn't
yes.
realize that.
the black, and I don't know if there were any Latinos there, they had to file suit
Hmm.
to get it out in the open. It was the same thing with the white young man down there in South Carolina. He goes and shoots 9 black people, murders them in church, and they take him out to Burger King. It's the insult and the injury,
Hmm.
you know, and both traditions have this. If the stranger comes and wants to pray with you, oh, I mean, who are you to block them for that? But they're killing us. You know, let me pray with you, and then when we're finished, I kill you. I mean, gee whiz, do we need to change something here? Something is not reading quite right with that script. But there are many underlying things. The leaders across the movements, Black Lives Matter, Sapelo Square, Muslim Arc, are all women
Hmm.
of color. And I just came out of a webinar where it became, well, what would Malcolm say? Well, what would Betty say? You know, it becomes
Hmm.
now, how are you going to, what are you going to say Why is some of the hesitation on the sidelines because the central leadership is spread out and it's by women? Not the first time, but is that going to
No.
change how we strategize? Because one of the most important things is we have an interesting spider here. We go after two legs on the front segment, and the back two get stronger. We leave the front segment and go to the middle segment, and the front segment gets a chance to regenerate. You see? And so our strategy has to be all encompassing. What would you suggest when the protests are over, or when in every city there's National Guard, and if Trump has his way, the militia is there behind the National Guard? What would you say? Because I'm a conspiracy theorist. I thought they opened up the cities quickly to get the protests off the streets. That's just me. Um, what do we do next? How do we educate, Reverend Linda?
Well, I'm conflicted because um as I was this past Monday evening and all Monday actually, and as I continue to be today, I am hurting because I am trying to figure out how to empower my nephew's generation, which are the 30 somethings, um, into the process of supporting their anger. And
Mm,
their anger is, do Black Lives matter only when white officers are killing blacks, or do they matter when we're killing our own?
mm-hmm,
And the rally that I attended on Monday evening, hosted by Saint Sabina with Father Michael Flager, um,
tell us about that a little
addressed,
bit.
I'm
Tell us
sorry,
about it. Tell us about that a little bit.
yes, at 5:47 a.m. Monday morning, I was texting Father Mike and at least 7 other pastoral ministerial leaders of faith and lamenting about the 104 people shot across the city of Chicago.
Mm-hmm,
12 dying, no, 14 dying, 12 of whom children, the youngest 3 years old. And I just reiterated my nephew's lament because my nephew and I had been in conversations for the past week. He's a police officer in the 16th district, which is Austin, one of the highest communities of drug and gun violence across the city.
mm-hmm,
And it angered him that there was a global response to the George Floyd, Breonna, and others when there doesn't appear to him to be nearly half of a community response. Every time he turns around, every beat, there's something happening, and he doesn't see the faith community doing anything. And
mm-hmm,
he's not lost in understanding that the faith community has a moral power to move a community of people, in that the faith community took the lead ever since slavery ended. You had
mm-hmm.
14 pastors who went and got the argument for 40 acres and a mule.
Yeah.
But you have, in his reflection, Dr. King, you have in his reflection right now what he knows of Jesse Jackson, what he knows of even Reverend Otis Moss and Father Michael Flager. And he's like, where is the voice of the faith community on the West Side? And in the process of me trying to educate him to stop making the individuals in the West Side the enemy,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to help him understand what happens when a community implodes upon itself and that it has systemic issues undergirding it that have been existent for some time. He was willing to do the homework, but his lament could not change. And that Monday morning, it was ringing in my head.
Wow.
By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Father Mike had the flyer prepared with the announcement made. There will be a public rally to address these 104 shootings across the city. And he raised demands on the state legislature and on the police department that the police have to solve the crime. It's not enough just to arrest or respond after the fact. You have individuals, one woman who testified, she was shot in May. She hadn't even received a phone call yet to be interviewed by the police. And here we are at the end of June.
Right.
She had 2 surgeries, nearly died. It was on the public media because she was at a gas station getting a bottle of water. Innocent victim.
Mm-hmm.
But for the police not to even call and do an interview was ridiculous. It took Father Mike reaching out to our mayor, raising sane with our mayor for our mayor to follow back with the police department, and they call her to schedule an appointment for an interview. Really? But that's what we're dealing with. So he raised that point during the rally.
Well, Dr. Harriet, you work at Iman, and there is the uh, Green Reentry Program where, and I'm saying we because I'm on their executive board, but where we just lost 2 young men, not to COVID, but to street violence. But what are some of the philosophical influences as to add or bring to the table of this fight?
Before I answer that, I'm thinking about philosophical um, things. I wanted to just to touch on what Minister Linda mentioned on the West Side, and this organization is a partner with Iman as it relates to working with young men between the ages of 16 and 25 who are at high risk of being shot or shooting, high risk of violence. There's an organization program called Ma'afa Redemption Project, and it's out of New Mount Pilgrim Church, and that's on the West Side. I've been there. So I don't know if your nephew is doing anything with them, but that's a resource as far as on the West Side and a faith community involved in specifically as it relates to violence
The
reduction.
whole West Side got one faith community?
No, I'm just saying that that's one that I'm familiar of.
Oh, okay.
That's on the West Side where where it's a faith community addressing violence on the West Side. And then also I'm thinking about women and I don't know what's going on, but I know a few years ago, and I'm sure they're still doing some things, the Fierce Women of Faith. That, these are women of faith, different traditions, going and praying on corners, trying to reduce violence where there was violence on a hot corner just going around the city. I know that it was pretty active 2015, 2016. I'm not sure what's going on
Participated as
now.
well.
I'm sorry.
I participated with the Fierce Women of Faith for some time as well.
Yeah, I was involved a little bit, but I haven't heard anything about them recently. But I was just saying, that was another initiative that was led by women. But we need more of that. We need more of that.
Well, what if they're praying? I'm of the Fannie Lou Hamer School. You can pray until you drop. If that's wonderful. What was the result?
I can't tell you because I didn't stay long enough. Minister Linda?
What we experienced during the period in which I was actively involved, not only was there a community uplift because they realized that they were no longer in a bubble hidden from the rest of the city, but that there were women from across the city who lived as far away as the northwest suburbs willing to come out and support them in their struggle to
Mhm.
reckon with the violence that they were enduring, as well as to work in communication with perpetrators when the perpetrators were willing to dialogue. We knew it was a hotbed situation,
Mhm.
but that was our goal, to come in and respond and pray in the community, pray with the actual victims, and where the perpetrators were willing to sit down and dialogue with the perpetrators to offer them an idea of understanding the harm they do themselves as they seek to do harm on others.
Well, some of that has, of course, become the subtext in the protests we see now. People sitting on the sideline. These people are violent anyway. They Some have been confused by the fact that they can't pinpoint it. They have very little evidence, in many cases, but they see white youth, Latino youth, black youth, mixed race kids, young people, older people, really old people, like the old man that got knocked down. Um, so the American fabric, for all of its various agendas, came out on this issue, but a subtext was always there. No, they're really looting. They're still killing each other in high numbers. Oh, why doesn't the black community take care of its own? Why aren't the mothers turning in sons who have become terrorists in the communities? Why is it that, uh, I don't know, drugs are running rampant? Why is it that moms like Dr. Harriet have to move away from the city because you can't figure out the city? For those of us who are not from Chicago. And then I tried to get a little bit of a history on Chicago. And the west side of Chicago was one of the most decimated parts of Chicago during the race riots. Never been built back up. Millions upon millions of dollars have been thrown into the south side of Chicago. Can't say it's done a hell of a lot of good, but little has come to the west. I'm just talking as an outsider. Uh, Little has come to the west side. What is going on, ladies? People want to understand. Some do really want to understand. But if you're killing yourself, how are you going to complain about about somebody else killing you?
My argument for resisting the temptation to hold members of those who are on the west side living and surviving in that kind of condition as many decades as they have is that we have to look beyond the surface, and the surface being that which you see with your eyes, read with the newspaper, and hear on the news, and focus on what created what we see. What created what we see was a disenfranchisement, an absolute disconnect of access to educational opportunities and funding that would increase the viability for the youth in those communities to have a chance. And then multiply that by the structural redistricting of those communities so that they would viability lose options for governmental funding to help with the mental health, hospitals, etc.,
Mhm.
places and organizations that could support the viability. I had a cousin when I was a young teenager who was very involved in the Better Boys Foundation on the west side. And the work that it took to keep those children focused as she also part-time worked with the Department of Illinois Children and Family Services to address children in very high-risk situations.
Mhm.
You begin to have an exposure to see there's a systemic issue undergirding this.
Mm.
And when you take a normal situation, move it out of normal, put it into abnormal, and then demand and expect that that abnormal situation is going to just fix itself while you're pulling away the resources, the support mechanisms, and the funding,
Right.
then yeah, you're going to have an ant in a barrel situation. If they see somebody go up, they're going to reach up and grab them because they figure if you go up, I want to go up. And they don't realize the minute you grab my leg, I'm coming back down. I can't open the door and pull you through now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happening. It's a constant implosion.
Well,
Yeah,
But
so I'm
the
going to answer your question.
response that my, I'm sorry, go
No,
ahead.
that's fine.
I'm
Continue.
sorry.
No, continue.
The response that my nephew gave this young police officer is that if he could talk to the faith leaders in these communities who know, just like you said, Dr. Aldine, they have the parishioners who know who the violators are, they know who the perpetrators are. But if they get the wisdom and the understanding that they will have representatives from the 16th District Police Department to support and stand with them, the courage to go ahead and begin to demonstrate and begin to call out their own perpetrators in their own communities will have more viability. Right now, the response they're receiving from the few faith leaders that they have spoken to is a fear for their parishioners. What happens when we finish today's demonstration?
Mm.
Dr.
I
Harris,
wanted to go back and
So
respond to what you were saying as far as Iman and, our philosophical stance on this. And it's, I'm not sure if philosophical, but how we address, you know, fundamentally how we address the issue on the South side. You know, Iman is
I'm
located on
working hard to get it on the west side.
the
Go
you
ahead.
sure are. Yeah, on the South side. We specifically respond to high risk young men, 20 ages 18 to 25, as well as returning citizens, trying to address some of those systemic um, um, challenges that have existed in our community, for centuries, that have, created, the environment for this violence to take place. It just didn't happen. As you mentioned, it just didn't happen overnight. We do this in our Green Reentry program where we provide training in construction and transitional housing, and we provide behavioral health and physical health programs, physical health services in our federally qualified health center. We're trying to impact economic development in Inglewood, through our Go Green and Racine project, where we are employing the young men who are in our training program to help build this fresh marketplace, which will provide not only jobs, but it will provide fresh produce in an area that's a food desert. We're working with Black owned construction companies and others to build up, and as well as led by in partnership with residents associations, residents and resident associations in Inglewood. So we're doing what we can. There are other organizations doing different types of work, but Imam, we've tried to address the um, the challenge of systemic racism and economic exclusion holistically with our health center, with our green reentry program, with our arts and culture, where we seek to inspire and motivate the spirit of individuals, and through our organizing around food access, around criminal justice reform. But I'm inspired. I'm inspired by the activists. I'm inspired by this moment, and like many people concerned that it's going to stop. I think that we don't. A lot of people are motivated to want to do something. A lot of people of faith are motivated to do something. A lot of people outside of the African American community of faith are motivated to do something, but they, stuck on, I, I'm wearing my t-shirt, I have my sign, how can I do more? We don't know what to do more. We want to, be more inclusive. We want to support diversity. We talk about equity, but we don't know how to do equity.
Exactly.
And we can do equity in a way where people don't necessarily feel like they're losing their personal wealth, but we can, there's a lot of wealth to share. We just
Mhm.
need to do it. And I was sitting there thinking, and I have to do some research on this. I'm inspired by this, but after 400 years of enslavement, there was reconstruction, and it didn't take decades upon decades upon decades for Black folks to progress. And
Mhm.
if with the right structural adjustment, we could do this. We just need to remember how to do it.
It's very interesting that you say that. I've just been all day long listening to many, many voices, uh, some who are not African American, like the story that Reverend Linda told about the woman she works with, trying to understand about Aunt Jemima. I just find that it's not funny. But I can almost see how she could not hear that story.
Hmm.
You see?
Yeah.
And it might be because we never protested it in a way that was clear. We just went and bought Aunt Jemima pancake mix. And I think we have to get some clarity about this story. We don't want to, what do they call that? Shaming culture? I mean, you shame people and then pretty soon they take it, pack it, and leave, right? Because their psyches can only handle so much shame.
Hmm.
So you have to, we have to think of strategic ways to be a little uh, clearer
Hmm.
about, we can explain systemic racism and pop up those things like Linda had to dig deep, coming up with analogy after analogy after analogy till it finally hits home. And you have to keep
Hmm.
doing that. And at the same time, we've got to work on our own vulnerabilities. And it's people in faith community. I remember one of the first times I came to Chicago, and I came up, I think it was Madison. I think it was Madison Avenue on the west side. And I counted churches. And my youngest daughter said, "Oh my goodness, are there that many people in Chicago that each one of them, these places can have people going?" And I said, "I really don't know, but probably big and small congregations and this, that, and the other." Were they doing something for the west side of Chicago? No. I go to the south side of Chicago. I hear about Trinity, and I have to confess, I heard about Trinity before Obama because Trinity and all of its members involved themselves so widely in Chicago life. Then I heard about Father Flagger. Then I look up, and Flagger is out there, and I'm saying, "Oh, this is like the Berrigan brothers that I knew because one of them was my colleague." And but then I'm saying, "Oh my goodness, he's talking to black Protestant ministers. I'm loving it. I'm loving it." But it's not replicated.
Hmm.
Not replicated where the people who want to help can see that you're doing for self, but also that we can tell them where we need the assistance. It can't always be about money. I mean, where
Hmm.
do I help? Where can I be the most productive? You tell me. Don't let me decide for you where my help goes. What do we do with that? Come on, ladies. Moving along here.
I'm sitting
My
here thinking
biggest
about. I'm going.
hope,
I'm sorry. Go on.
my biggest hope is that the answer to that question comes out of the urgency of those who are in a position such as myself, serving in a church that has been a voice, but
Mhm.
calling on the leadership to do a better job of reaching back and pulling on the coattails of those who have written his coattails.
Right, right.
and demanding that they understand how incredibly and important it is that they each go back into their own communities and do the same work. And
But
if they need the
how are you going
empowerment,
to hold them
we'll
accountable?
guide them on how to get the empowerment.
How are you going to hold them? Because, see, responsibility and accountability are two very important things. I can walk away from a very inspiring moment, but are you going to hold me responsible and accountable for the outcomes of my learning?
But that's
So,
what we need to create,
That's part of the
something different. We need to
process
create a
to be.
system. Yeah.
what?
No, I'm saying that's where we need to, I mean, as far as the accountability piece, that's where we have to, whoever's leading that charge in that community with that religious institution, whether it's a church, whether it's a masjid, whether it's church and a masjid in collaboration.
Mm,
That's my vision. That's what I think that we should be doing, that we should have, if it's, my block, my community, that we're intentional about the church and that we're intentional about the mosque coming together to address, at least on this block, or these couple of blocks, what's
yeah.
going on as it relates to food, as it relates to housing and other social services that we could be doing to better the lives of those people in that community. We don't do that at the basic level. To take it back to where the conversation began, how do we address our own social ills in our community, as people of faith, a black people of faith? We don't do that, and we need to do that. We need to be intentional about getting out. There are some, there are some. I know that Masha Takwa and Trinity have done some things together, but there isn't enough of that around the city. But um, I think that there is not impossible for a few people to lead that charge, and then involve community members and create a system of accountability. In my mind, it's not that difficult. In my mind, it's just we just need to do it and
You
stop
just need
talking
to
about
do
it. I'm that type of person.
it.
So in my mind, it's not that difficult.
Because the people are dying every day. Like she was talking about, this was a horrible weekend in Chicago. We have a new
Yes,
black
yes.
chief of police who I know is sorry now that he smiled when he accepted his job. You know, who things are running amok. He doesn't have it in control. And at some point, citizens, those mothers, every one of those little hoodlums has a mama somewhere. We got to figure out what is the disconnect. Is he using his notoriety and the drug money to buy her a big screen TV, pay all the bills at home, so she's hesitant to turn him in? Where has the moral fiber gone? Where has the spiritual accountability gone?
Well, I don't.
Unfortunately, it left the church with generations who left the church, and we're trying now to pull them back in.
Mm.
Mm,
Well, go get your fisherman's thingamajiggy and go out there and hook them and drag them
It's
out
happening.
there.
It is happening.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
is
yeah,
happening.
yeah, yeah.
but I don't think we need to bring them back into the church, and I don't think we need to bring them back into the mosque. I think that we need to inspire them to do for those people who are of faith, because not everybody's of faith, but for those people who are of faith, to do God's work in the street. You know.
Okay, but
Yeah,
how
unfortunately, the
are
mom and the pops that Dr. Eldine is referring to
you?
are the mom and the pops who walked out of the church hurt, angry, or what have you during a certain period in time in which their circumstances caused them to be perfect victims of illustration for whatever intent the former focus of the church may have been at that time. You have to look at the generations and the political climate as well as the social climate in each generation. Right now, there is a major push to bring the very lost souls back home because those lost souls have voice and power that can be used alternatively in ways that have been silenced before.
I think that's very true for both houses of worship, but I think for both the masjid and the church, you have to listen carefully to the critiques and the issues of those that left. Because if they're coming back, or you're encouraging them or enticing them to come back to that which they left and it hasn't changed, then you're going to wind up in the same circle. But I think it is true that people of faith have to begin to speak out, even if it hurts. In Islam, there's this saying, about you got to speak out, even if it's about your own mother, or your father who is engaged in wrongdoing and hurtful acts against the community. And if enough voices are speaking out, something will change.
Mm.
Because I don't know how anybody who has the best of intentions can see their way into more than buying the t-shirt, holding the signs, and shouting the words. I don't know. Maybe you ladies can tell me something different.
I don't know.
I knew I couldn't march because my health would have been challenged.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't go to some of the memorial services that have been going on. So I kept brainstorming until I realized my greatest gift is to empower the youth in my community that I come into contact with on how they can actually carry my mantle forward in their own way.
Exactly.
And part of that empowerment is giving them access to individuals in leadership who can support what they want to do. I didn't just tell my police officer nephew, this is what you need to do. I started connecting him with individuals who are major power hitters in the activist movement, in the faith community on the West Side, and moving forward into actual legislative representatives. That's my next step. Connect him with the representatives who are sitting on the Illinois Black Caucus and are reflecting those varied areas so that they can begin to understand we want change and we're calling on you to do your part too, because the legislators have a part to play.
Absolutely.
Very true.
That is that's the way that I see our ability to do more than just buy a t-shirt, hold a sign, and say a prayer.
Dr. Harriet?
What am I doing? As an
Well, I mean, it's all about strategy. I
I
have
think that we
nothing
need
here
what
and stuff, so I'm gonna drag her. Both of us will be limping in, but we will get some stuff done. And inspire some young people. Go ahead.
yeah, I guess my focus, I'm really right now, I've been meditating on this, and my focus has really been on um, the long game. How do we foster and create the space, the environment for equity, and where I would like to see faith leaders is within their spheres of influence, connecting with employers of faith so that they can, close the pay gap, so that they can invest in the communities where their employees live, so they can, support economic development efforts to reduce some of the um, systemic oppressive practices that creates the environment for violence, to continue to fester. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with it, as far as the role of where I believe that people of faith should be, really focused on equity and creating systemic change, so that we can get back to that period of of reconstruction, if that's possible, or something beyond that, without seeing the same outcomes post reconstruction.
Well, I think we're in a way, even though after every hardship there's ease, recognizing the ease and the mercy that us in the space we have now. We Many problems which many of us have known to always have been there, the food insecurities, the housing insecurities, the educational deficiencies, and etc., excuse me, have a window where we can immediately work. Fall is coming, not quite here yet, but fall is coming. There have been tons of food, not necessarily again poured on the west side, but poured on the south side. I was speaking to someone yesterday, and they were telling me so much food has been poured on the south side that they're asking people to hold up with the food drops. And I said, well, that could be for several reasons. One is I don't know how to store food. I don't know how to can it. I don't know how
Mhm.
to preserve it, but I don't know how to not be wasteful. You see, you know,
Mhm.
I because there is minus that spiritual guidance. What did they? I forget what they call them, but you have this thing of you eat a little bit to get the fat, salt, sugar, whatever it is, binge, and then the rest of it you throw in the trash. Even poor people throw food away, not knowing how to store it,
Mhm.
not knowing what to buy so that they can extend the life. There's so many things that over this summer we can do to provide for a little bit of stability. I personally hope the protests continue, but I hope they get more sophisticated because the other side is surely strategizing to end them. Um,
Absolutely.
One of the things on the table, and I would ask everybody to watch it. Hassan Minaj on Patriot Act. His latest episode is on elections. There's a concerted effort to suppress the vote. There's a concerted effort to make people afraid to vote. It's like a throwback to the 1950s. I
Mhm.
can't give
Yes.
you a test, but I'll kill you if you show up, kind of thing. I mean, the pushback. Uh, Bubba Watson certainly didn't get to be a top NASCAR driver, not knowing one thing from the other, and says, you can tell me it was a hoist, but I know a noose when I see one. And I'm
Exactly.
okay. You know,
Exactly.
the pushback through media, through spinning stories, all of those things has already begun. I would suggest that we come together with other well-intended folk and begin to scurry like our life depends on it, to open another chapter, to put another foot forward so
Mhm.
pushback doesn't push us way, way, way back, but that we can go forward. And Minister Linda, I'm so glad that you're here with us. Many in our viewing audiences don't often get to talk with an African American female minister who I happen to know, and that's a great thing. Dr. Harriet, who does some
Thank you.
amazing things. Both of you do such amazing things in the world of grant writing, in the worlds of advocacy, thinking about cultural competencies, and hopefully people write down your name so they can harass you along with me, so that we can draw upon the wonderful and amazing things that you do. And what I'm going to do is shut my mouth and give you last words
Oh, wow.
today.
I just want to thank you, Dr. Aldine, for inviting us to have this dialogue. Um, Anytime you feel led to put us on the spot and not give us any forewarning on what questions you have is fine by me. Thank
I
you
plan on
for
doing some of my
giving me the space to learn
yeah.
from you and to share with you. I'm always happy to share any opportunity to dialogue when Harriet is in the room. I
Yeah.
appreciate Dr. Harriet's wisdom, her experience, and the angle in which she brings a conversation forward. So it's wonderful, and I'm just grateful to be here. Absolutely grateful.
Thank you. We're grateful to have you, Dr. Harriet.
Alhamdulillah.
Well, Dr. Aldine, thank you for inviting me along with Minister Linda on this show. And I'm thank you, both of you. I'm humbled by the words that you just said. To be here with between two powerhouses of women, the voice, the spirit that comes out. I've been in many spaces with you, Minister Linda, bringing me to tears with, with your prayer. I mean, just with that power that you come and Dr. Aldine, just learning. I just I like to literally sit at your feet for hours and listen to you. But thinking about my final words on this conversation right here is really just let's continue to support the momentum and let's be strategic. We know that this is not going to last forever. We know that this moment is not going to last much longer. We've been here before.
Right.
We've been here many times before.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a global response, and we need to harness that energy and continue and connect with those people who are sincerely motivated to do something,
Yeah.
because we can be in a position to move the needle a little bit, and we also need to be aware of everything of our surroundings in political and legislative and the judicial, in the trickery and all of the areas where that we need to be um, um, aware of. We need to just continue to move forward and be strategic in this moment.
Well, one of the things I intend to do is to put different people who would not normally be in conversation with each other in conversation with each other. So I might ask you to come back and speak with some of the immigrant Muslim psychiatrists, some of the folks working on are we in a constitutional crisis? Because see, one of the problems, as I see it, are these pigeonhole conversations. You get three black women, all you expect to hear about is black stuff. Well, we know a hell of a lot more than just about black stuff. Okay? So I want to mix and match and mix up our conversations as we move our strategies forward because it's going to take all of us.
Hmm.
Yes.
And I want to thank both of you
Thank you.
for your time. Have no fear, I will be calling on you again. And again, this is Critical Talk with Professor Amina Al-Din, with Dr. Harriet Lewis, and Minister Linda Holiday Lawrence. Thank you very much, and please stay.